Hello, and welcome to the Amazon Web Services Partner Webinar Series. Our topic today will demonstrate how to extend enterprise cloud security with Trend Micro on AWS. I'm your host, Maya Kabasi, with the Partner Marketing team here in Seattle. I'd like to start with a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording today's webinar, and while lines are muted, you can submit questions anytime during the presentation. Use the Q&A widget in your browser to do so, and we'll take some time for questions at the end of the webcast. In addition, the presentation will be available for on-demand. You may find our webinar recordings and materials available on our AWS, SlideShare, and YouTube channels. A few words on today's agenda before I introduce our presenters. Today we'll talk about some of the concerns organizations are voicing as they embrace the cloud and discuss how AWS security best practices help to address these concerns. In addition, we'll hear about how a leading security vendor, Trend Micro, is helping organizations like yours take on your share of the security responsibility. I'm pleased to be joined by two speakers from Trend Micro, Steve Neville, Director of Cloud and Data Security, and Mark Nikovan, Principal Engineer, Cloud and Emerging Technologies. We also have Tom Leshevsky here with us, Solutions Architect here at AWS. We will begin today with Steve Neville, who will set the stage with an introduction to enterprise and cloud security challenges. Then Tom Leshevsky will provide an overview of some of the key benefits of leveraging AWS, along with how customers are using us today. Then we'll pass the mic to Mark Nikovan, who will provide us with an overview of Trend Micro Deep Security as a Service platform. Then we'll wrap up with a Q&A. So without further delay, let me pass the mic to Steve Neville, Director of Cloud and Data Security with Trend Micro. Take it away, Steve.
Thanks very much, Maya, and welcome everyone to this webinar. I wanted to introduce the topic that we're going to be going through today, and that's all about how organizations like yours are using the cloud and dealing with security in the cloud, just with a very simple statement around security and compliance. And that is that it's a top priority whether you're using the cloud or not. And that's a big recognition factor because the cloud changes things but doesn't change things. And these are always going to be important priorities. And the second part is really that as you move to the cloud to gain the benefits, what companies are seeing is that there are concerns, and they're concerns based on not understanding and not knowing different things. And what we're here to talk about today is just addressing some of those concerns as a part of the way that AWS looks at the world when it comes to security, which is around shared responsibility. And so if we look at some of the concerns that we're hearing from customers that, again, are based on just not quite understanding or knowing, one of the big concerns we hear about is just where is my data and where is it going to live? So we have international organizations that are looking at using the AWS Cloud, using the cloud in general, and their data is going to live in the cloud. So they want to know who has access to the data, how can I control that? What are the data privacy pieces that are put in place to make sure that my data remains protected? And in some cases, as an example you see on the slide here with the U.S. Patriot Act, and there are other legislative pieces around the world that come into play, will my data leave the country, and is that even relevant to my organization's data? Another important one that we hear about is if I terminate a cloud server, what happens to the data? Does it still exist? Is it at risk? And these are things that organizations like yours need to understand, that there are ways of dealing with that. Some other concerns that we hear about are really centered around the fact that the cloud is a naturally multi-tenant environment. So they are up there, their data, is it in their applications, are they being intermingled? Is there a risk of a configuration error on their deployments leading to a data exposure? And will I even know, in fact, because my my stuff, if you will, is sitting in the cloud if my servers are being attacked? These are all legitimate questions. We'll definitely talk to these as we walk through what AWS puts in place and recommends and what leading organizations like Trend Micro can help with. Finally, from a compliance perspective, compliance is something that is of critical importance whether you're sitting in the cloud or not in the cloud. So you think about things like PCI and other types of regulations that are in place that you have to comply with. The great news is that organizations like the PCI Council have put out guidance that basically say, when you're in the cloud, you are still responsible for what your organization does. However, it's different in the sense that the shared responsibility model that is espoused by AWS is in place where AWS is going to help on the underlying and you will own your data. So these are compliance questions that there are lots of opportunities to meet with. And ultimately, understanding who's responsible for cloud security is something that every customer that we run into want to make sure they understand the delineation around. So who owns what pieces? And the great news is, and I'm going to pass it over to Tom and Mark next to talk about, is I think that AWS has done a great job of delineating where they place their bets in terms of providing the underlying security and where your responsibility kicks in and what you need to do and then how you can deal with that. We'll walk through some of the pieces that, as an example, Trend Micro can help with. So Tom, maybe I'll pass it back to you and you can talk about the underlying shared responsibility model brought on by AWS.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Steve, for the introduction and the segue right into what Steve was talking about. We take a look at the security shared responsibility model. So what does that encompass? And there's actually three main components to that shared security model. So the first is the infrastructure security, which is essentially the data centers and the industry standards and the government standards that AWS complies to, and is the audits that we comply to as well. And the other part of that security sort of moving up the stack, if you will, looking at the bottom, is the services security. So you're going to be using things like EC2 instances, S3, DynamoDB, things like that. How can you secure them? And then the last component, which the folks at Trend Micro are going to cover, is application security, because that's your responsibility. So we take care of infrastructure security, services security, but then in this shared responsibility model, in terms of encrypting the data at rest in transit, the security keys to get into your services, is that something that you need to make sure that you secure. What I'm going to cover in these slides is I'm not going to go over things like VPC, security groups. I think everyone understands this on the call. So I'm going to go over some new things that we have to offer and talk a little bit about IAM, so identity and access management, since we find a lot of customers still don't use IAM to its fullest. So the first part of it is what's going on with the infrastructure, right? What's going on with the services? And AWS is completely transparent about that. So anytime anything is happening, we report that immediately on the AWS Services Health Dashboard. And you can see the link there where you can get in and take a look at if any services are down in any specific region, any changes that happen when we go through and we refresh new services, we deploy new services. We have an entire configuration and change management. But obviously from an applications perspective, so if you have an e-business suite application running, to make sure that that is changed or database is refreshed, you need to handle that. So here are some infrastructure and network security considerations in distributed denial of service attacks. So we have proprietary things in place in order to make sure that distributed denial of service attacks cannot happen on our infrastructure. The other thing is man in the middle. So we prevent that by all of our AWS APIs So if you access our services, they're all protected by SSL, and we continually refresh the keys that are part of your EC2 instances. There's also IP spoofing, and that is prohibited. It's not allowed. When you're on an instance, you can only use the IP address and MAC addresses associated with that instance, so there's no IP spoofing allowed. I think this one folks might be aware of if you want to do penetration testing or any type of port scanning. That's a violation, although you can fill out a form and get, obviously you want to do some penetration testing and port scanning on your applications. You can do that by filling out a form, but we don't allow, we'll shut it down unless you've been prior approved. And the other one is packet sniffing, and Steve talked about this a little bit in terms of your data on the network. So on the AWS network, that's not allowed. So you're running in a virtualized environment, so there might be customers running next to you, but there's no way they can get access to your data. The other thing that we often get asked about is industry standards and certifications, validations that we're a part of. And the SOC 3 audit, that's something new. We've supported SOC 1 and SOC 2 prior to that. Now, if you want to get a report on like SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, we don't have those ready accessible to you on the Internet. You can make a request in order to get those. The other thing is Fed. The FedRAMP, FISMA, ITAR. So the fact of the matter is we have GovCloud, which is our secure environment, but a lot of government agencies don't run on GovCloud because of all the standards that we have in place. And the only thing that GovCloud has over our RTI compliance is the fact that in the GovCloud, only U.S. employees can work there. So it's the only difference. Completely compliant from that regard. So a lot of government agencies do, in fact, just run on the standard AWS. I want to talk a little bit about HIPAA. Of course, there's PCI as well. So we have a lot of financial services companies like NASDAQ running on top of us because of the PCI compliance. This is the scope of the services that are part of the SOC audit. So you can see most of the services you're probably using in production today are going to be covered by our SOC audit. HIPAA is, in case you're not aware, I wanted to point this one out. This is fairly recent, in the last like 3 or 4 months. What HIPAA says now is that if you are a provider of services, compute services, hosting provider, that you have to sign a BAA. So this was not true before. We just provided a HIPAA compliant platform for you, but now actually AWS will sign a BAA. So if you're going to do HIPAA, you need to run EC2 dedicated instances and S3 and EBS. So those are the 3 services that are fully HIPAA compliant. It's up to you to make sure you encrypt that data at rest and in transit. The other thing to point out is you have to run on dedicated instance infrastructure, but the cost on that, in case you haven't seen the announcement, has gone down from like $10 an hour to $2 an hour. So a significant reduction in price on those. Cloud HSM is something I wanted to point out as well. So this is a hardware security module. It's another new offering from AWS because what we found is that when people have crypto keys and they want to move their processing on-premise to AWS with their own crypto keys, well, they want to move the crypto keys over as well because that's the way to access those keys on-premise is not viable. So we do have a Cloud HSM service where you can store your crypto keys on a service from us and maintained by us inside of a VPC. Let's talk a little bit about IAM. And like I said at the beginning, is people are used to using IAM in terms of users and groups. But what I want to talk about is IAM roles because a lot of people are not aware of IAM roles, and they can be used in order to do service-to-service communication They can be used to provide temporary security credentials, and they can also be used to provide access in a mobile type application. So this is different than standard users and groups. This is roles. So let's take a look at a couple of scenarios and how IAM roles would be used. So the first of these, and sorry if some of my graphics didn't come through here, but what we have in this scenario is we have a developer, and there's a production environment. So you wouldn't want your developer to have access to your production account, right? So what you would do is you would create a role with permissions on, say, DynamoDB, all right? So you create that role, and then you create a user. So that user that you create, the development user, can assume that role from anywhere from 15 minutes to 36 hours and have access into that DynamoDB table because they assume that role for that period of time. So that's one use case where you'd have two accounts. Someone needs access to that other account. Another use case is cloud-based applications. So a lot of people, like if you go to websites, you authenticate through Facebook, Google, things like that. You can do the same thing with AWS now. So in this case as well, use the security token service in order to get a temporary token. The authentication itself happens against Facebook and Google, so once they're authenticated there, they get the temporary token, and they can access, say, something like S3 or DynamoDB on AWS. So obviously, if you have tons of mobile devices, there's no way that you want to set up all these users and groups within AWS. I missed one of the other use cases, and let me slide back one. All right, the last thing I want to mention, which I think is a great new offering from AWS, is that you're going to have developers, you're going to have production people, you're going to have test folks, right? So in the past, when you set up an IAM user or group, that user had no context whether the system was in development, test, or production, right? So they could start up and shut down instances in any of those environments. Now we have what's called resource level tagging, where you can actually put tags to say, oh, this resource is a production resource, and then you can say that user, if there's a tag on there called production, it's a developer that's trying to shut it down. It does not have permissions in order to shut down an instance. I think what this will do is that if you're not using tagging currently to do cost allocation reporting, is that you're probably going to want to start using it because this is a feature in the enterprise that a lot of people are finding valuable in terms of giving context to developers and production users in terms of what privileges they have in order to start up and shut down EC2 resources. So I'm now going to turn it over to Mark, and he can tell you about how Trend Micro can help you secure that piece of the puzzle, which is the application.
Thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate that. It was a really great presentation that hit on a few notes that I'll reinforce and show the practical way that we approach this. So first thing I just wanted to recap was the shared responsibility model. And you're going to hear, you heard it from Tom, you heard it from Steve in the intro. I'll drill it into you again. This is a very important piece of the security puzzle on AWS. And what you're seeing now is a slightly different way of looking at it. And you can see here we've got a clear division between AWS as the service provider and you as the client of the service. So AWS is responsible, as Tom noted, for the physical security, the facilities security, the physical, the network, and the virtualization infrastructure. And it's at that point in the stack that you as the client, or we as clients, need to take over. So we need to address the security of the operating system, of the applications that we're running, as well as manage accounts, the security groups, and the network configurations. And as you saw from Tom's presentation, AWS provides tools to help us with those last three. So to help us with account management, and to help us with, they provide security groups and the network configurations in VPCs and in EC2 so that we can lock things down. But it's up to us as clients to understand how those work and to configure them correctly. But where we find that most people need a lot of help, and you're going to need to use third-party controls, are securing your operating system and the applications that run on that. So one of the main products that we have from Trend Micro to address those concerns is called Deep Security. And at a really high level, we have the Deep Security Manager, and it provides your security controls. So you can see here we've got the icon set up for our control modules, or our protection modules. So we offer anti-malware protection, web reputation, which is content filtering, advanced firewalling capabilities, intrusion prevention and detection, file integrity monitoring, and log inspection. And all these controls work in concert. They work together to help lock things down. So depending on the scenario that you're looking to protect against or to secure from, you'll use a variety of combination of these controls. And the way they actually get applied is by using what we call the Deep Security Agent that's installed on your EC2 instances. So the manager helps coordinate the policy, and the agent that runs on your EC2 instances, whether they're in EC2 Classic or in VPC, is the software that's doing all the actual security work. So at a high level, like we talked about, Deep Security provides centralized security control management. And what that does is that gives you a unified interface to handle multiple regions or credentials for your AWS. So Tom had mentioned resource level IAM permissions. We can integrate with that into Deep Security. So depending on how you're viewing your security, you can see, or how you're applying your resources in AWS, you can match that with the security in Deep Security. It gives you simplified policy management across the organization. So it's really about giving you one look at your security, regardless of whether you have instances in Tokyo or in Northern Virginia or Oregon. What you want to focus on is what those are doing, not where they are. And that unified view helps you do that and match your policies. We have a broad platform support, which you'll see in a minute when we dive into the product. And as we've already mentioned, it's the agent that provides the protection on the EC2 instance. So all this together helps address your compliance challenges. And Tom already mentioned some of the big ones, so HIPAA, PCI compliance, looking at FedRAMP, ITAR, things like that. Those are a lot of moving parts to hit those compliance goals. And something like Deep Security helps you fulfill a large part when it comes to operating system and application security requirements. So altogether, this helps you enforce your security policy, so a technical enforcement of your security policy within your organization. So with that, what I'd like to do is address some specific challenges that customers have told us that they're having when it comes to deploying security within AWS. So I get the chance to talk to a lot of customers in many different verticals, so in financials, in healthcare, in commerce, in a bunch of them, and we hear a lot of common themes, and one of them is that people don't want to manage yet another binary. So the Deep Security Agent is another piece of software that needs to go into your standard deployment. And that it's unavoidable. It's just the way technology is going to have to function. But what we've done with Deep Security, both Deep Security as a Service and Deep Security 9, which are two flavors of the product, is that we've made it as simple as possible to manage that binary. So we allow you to deploy it via the user data field within the EC2 Management Console or APIs. You could use Chef, Puppet, direct connections with SSH or PowerShell. Really the approach is however you want to orchestrate your deployment in the cloud, or however you manage your EC2 instances, we will slide right in with a minimum amount of effort. And that's in direct response to what we're hearing from our customers, and that they don't want to have to go through a bunch of arduous steps to manage another binary. So you can also install the agent right into your AMI and activate it on demand, and we'll see that in a minute. And once that's there, you've got the additional challenge of keeping that agent up to date. And the good news is we've already taken care of that for you within Deep Security. You can update the agent right from within the management console. So once the binary is deployed and sits on your EC2 instance, that's the only deployment you're going to have to worry about. You can continue to update it right through the Deep Security communications chain. So it's a lot less effort once it's there. So with that, what we're going to do is we're actually going to look at a couple scenarios live in the product and see how easy that can be to deploy that agent. So I'll just start up my screen share here. And as this comes online, what you're going to see is a view into the Deep Security console. So this on your screen right now, what you're seeing is the Deep Security Manager. I'm logged in under my account, and you can see that I'm looking at one instance that's in Oregon, so in US West 2, and this one happens to be an Ubuntu Linux distribution. So what we're going to look at is how easy it can be to stand up another EC2 instance and deploy the Deep Security agent on that instance. So to do that, all we need to do is go to the Help menu, and then select Deployment Scripts from the drop-down. So as that comes down, I'm going to select Deployment Scripts, and what pops up is a wizard that helps me make intelligent decisions about what I'm about to deploy. So in this case, my first choice is the platform that I want to choose. And in this case, what I'm going to select is Windows 64-bit, because I'm going to stand up a new EC2 instance in Windows. So I'll select Windows, and you can see in the large text area, it automatically starts to build a script. Which is excellent. So this is already based on my choice of Windows. It's building, in this case, because it's Windows, it's building a PowerShell script. What I'm going to ask it to do is activate the agent automatically. And you'll see that I've now given more options, and the script adds to itself. So now I'm going to select a default policy to apply. In this case, I'm simply going to select my demo policy. And what that indicates is that already has a configuration for anti-malware, some web reputation content filtering rules. It has some firewall configurations in there, and some basic IDS and IPS. And as I have more advanced policies, if I scroll down a little bit here, you can see I have like a cache policy, a chat application demo policy. These other policies have more specific controls to that task or role for that instance. So for the chat demo application, I have some integrity rules that make sure that that application is installed and valid. So what I'd like to do here is select the deep demo policy, and it's going to update my script even more. So when I look down into my text area, I've got an entire deployment script that's ready to roll. So I can simply select that and copy it into the clipboard. Now, if I had selected another platform, such as Ubuntu, what you're going to see really quickly here, if I select Ubuntu, it's going to respect the rest of my choices, but changes this deployment script away from PowerShell, which only works on Windows, and actually switches it to a generic bash script, which will run on Ubuntu. So it's an intelligent wizard that will help you quickly and easily grab and create this script. So I'm going to simply select it and copy it, and now I'm going to switch over to the EC2 management console. So in this case, I'm going to already be looking at Oregon, and you can see that I already have my one instance that we saw in Deep Security is running there. What I'm going to do is just click the Launch Instance Wizard. That's going to pop up, and we'll use the classic wizard to select the AMI that we'd like to launch. And in this case, we're going to pick Ubuntu 12.4 long-term support. So I select that. I'm going to start, let's say, 3 new instances, and I'll leave them as micros because we're just going to need them for demonstration purposes, and I click Continue. And here's where the magic happens. And I say magic because it lets us just do one simple paste, and that's the only step we need to take to deploy Deep Security. And we'll continue through this wizard, but as we're doing that, we're just going to select we'll select the defaults, and and we'll continue and we'll let it launch. And once it's launching, we'll have a little bit of a discussion about what happens in that user data field. So I've confirmed that's what I want to launch. And AWS gives me the 3 instance IDs for my request. And if I go back into the Deep Security Manager, I'll have that on the screen, and we're going to see those instances pop up in a minute when they're finished launching. So I've sent the request to AWS through the console. It is going to provision those new EC2 instances, and after they've completed booting, what's going to happen now is it's going to use that user data field. And this is a feature called Cloud Init, and it's available on quite a few AMIs. And so Ubuntu supports it, AWS Linux supports it, some custom AMIs support it, and as well, AWS has done some excellent work with their default Windows AMIs that they actually support user data as well. And what it lets you do is specify things for the instance to be aware of in their environment. So in this case, we've given it a script to execute on first boot. So what's going to happen is after those instances are provisioned and they boot up all the way, and after the OS comes online, it's going to grab the information from user data, and in this case, it's going to find out that it is an executable script, and now it's going to execute that script. And here you can see it's popped up already. Our Deep Security Management Console is automatically refreshed, and we see those 3 new instances coming online. One of them's quite fast, and it's already actually activated and going, and the other 2 are on their way. So that's a really quick and simple way that we've deployed that agent. And the really interesting thing about that is that what I just showed you now using the user data field is actually the long way to deploy the agent. And here we did was deploy 3 new instances in just a few minutes. I can just as easily bake that into my orchestration tool, so Chef or Puppet, and all of that would have happened automatically. So very simple, very easy, and that's, again, in direct feedback from what we've heard from the customers. We've tried to make it as simple as possible to do that. Now, there are other ways that people want to do that. You don't always want to boot or download and install the agent on the fly. Sometimes what you want to do is you want to create a gold image, so a master AMI. And I've already done that here in Northern California. As you can see, I've got a couple instances all running. I have 5 running. And what these are from a standard image that I've made. And in this case, it's my development image. And that image already has the Deep Security agent installed but not activated. So what I can do here now is go from the Deep Security Manager console and simply select these 3 instances and go to Actions. And I have the option to activate these. And I'm going to do that. But what I wanted to also bring up, and this segues into the second customer challenge that we wanted to talk about, was before I activate them, you notice I'm aware of them. And that was a big thing, and we're going to touch on that in more detail in a second, is awareness of what's already running in the cloud. So I have 2 of these 5 under active protection, but I know that there are 3 that aren't, so I'm going to activate them right now. And what we'll see over the next minute or so is that those are going to activate and come online. And then what we need to do is choose a policy. So with the user data style deployment, I pre-selected a policy and said, please apply this policy when you activate. And in this case, what I've done is discovered 3 instances that weren't already protected. So what I'll do now is that I will apply a policy once they've activated. So you can see here it's processing the activations. And what I'll do is I'll actually apply a policy while it's doing that because it'll just intelligently queue the actions for me. So I simply go to Actions and Assign Policy. And now I have the same drop-down that we saw in the deployment script wizard. And I can pick what I'd like to deploy. And in this case, I'm going to pick this caching policy. And this is a policy I've developed for a caching server like Varnish or Memcache. And it's got associated rules for file integrity monitoring, so to make sure that those servers are running and are tampered with, as well as intrusion detection and prevention items to make sure that the proper protocols are coming along the network. So I'll simply apply this policy. And what we'll see now is that these are all managed, and that one that I had selected is actually sending a policy update. And I can just as easily do that to the others by group selecting them and then applying a policy again. So I can again select my cache policy and apply it. So we've really tried to be very flexible in the way that we address getting the agent out there, because we understand the frustration with dealing with yet another piece of software that you need to manage in your stack. So we've tried to reduce that burden on you by working the way that you want to work and not adding any extra effort on your part. So very quick and very easy that you can do this and very simple. So now I'll just jump back to a slide very quickly if I can here. We'll see if I'll be able. And what I'd like to do is address the second customer concern. And the second really customer concern that we're seeing is, again, and we already mentioned it briefly, is being aware of assets within AWS. So we saw with that last demo, we were aware of 5 machines, and we'd protected 2 of them, but we hadn't protected the other 3 that were sitting there. So we quickly manually made that change. Now, not just being aware, but being able to take automatic actions when we discover things is something that our customers told us was very, very important. So especially in a compliance scenario, if there is an issue where there's a machine that's running and it's not protected, customers and everybody sees that it's very important to be able to automatically apply advanced security controls to round out the overall security under the shared responsibility model quickly and easily. So what we do is we use our technology within deep security called a cloud connector. And we've already seen that. We've seen 2 connectors that we had, one for Oregon and one for North California. We're going to jump back into the product again in a second and see this in more detail. But what this connector does is it syncs regularly with the credentials you assign it, so either to an entire region or a region filtered by your resource level IAM policy. And what it does is it regularly syncs and it intelligently syncs. So every few minutes it automatically pulls a region, but also anytime it detects any new activity in that region, it will also automatically synchronize. And once that synchronization happens, you get awareness within deep security, within the console. You see that that's there. But we also have the opportunity to take actions. And so this is the ability to set up automated actions based on discovering new instances. And that's what we're going to jump into the product and look at right now. So I'll just pull back at the console here. And it's just going to take a second to come back online. And what we're going to see now is in the EC2 management console, we'll already see that I have a bunch of instances running. I have a number of instances running. And just bear with me as a second as this comes back online, please. And what this is going to tie back into is what Tom had mentioned earlier in resource level tagging. And this is a very flexible, very important thing to take advantage of. So it's worth your time to play around with it, but also to research the great information that AWS has published online around resource tagging. And what it is you're already using resource level tagging, even if you're not aware of it. When you set a name on an instance, that's when you're seeing. That's when you're using a tag. So you're using a key of name and a value of whatever you've typed in. But you have the additional ability to add up to 10 full tags on these instances. And what that provides is the ability to make definitions, such as things along the lines of environment. So is this running in production or in development, or is it a test instance? You can also add additional intelligence, and you might have already implemented this with the guidance that AWS has provided around billing. So they've indicated for billing purposes, they'll sort your bill based on resource level tags. And you can leverage that yourself now, which is very important. So here we've resolved a little glitch, and I'm coming back online, and you can see my EC2 management structure. And what I've done is very simply provided a name key. But I could have extended this out and added my environment, so added production or development or whatever the case is. Like I said, you can add up to 10 unique keys. So I could have said, this is an R&D instance or whatever makes sense. What I've got set up currently is 3 database servers, and I've also got a number of web servers. So what we're going to do now is go back into the Deep Security Management Console and set up a task to take advantage of this extra metadata that we've added in AWS. So to do that, I go back to the console, and then I click on Administration, and I select Event-Based Tasks. And you can see here I already have a task that says assign the database policy to all DBs. What that does is it looks for the name tag for database. So we're going to create a new one for my web servers. So in this case, what I do is I select a new event type, and then it's computer created. So this is any time that cloud connector we mentioned finds a new computer and adds it into deep security, that's when I want to take an action. So I'll do that. I'll click next. And now I'm going to make my choices of what action to take. In this case, I'd like to activate the computer. And I'd also like to assign a policy automatically. So we're going to make an intelligent policy decision based on the metadata that we've assigned in AWS. In this case, what I'll do is I'll scroll down and I'll find my database, I'll find my web policy, and I'll select that. Activate my computer, and I'm going to assign a web policy anytime a computer is created that meets the following conditions. And in this case, I will select from my drop-down of possible options, I'm going to select Cloud Instance Metadata. And what that's going to do is provide us with our now familiar key and value. So in this case, I'm going to say it's a name, and that name is web. So anytime that it finds a key of name and that name being web, take the action. So assign that policy and activate the computer. I'll just give it a friendly name for the task, and I'll click Finish. And so now I've got two tasks set up. Assign the database policy anytime it sees the database name, and assign the web policy anytime it sees the web name. So now we'll go back into our computers list, and we're going to look at Northern Virginia, where I currently don't have anything. And that's because, for the demo purposes, I turned off the automatic sync. But you can think of this as far as somebody hasn't fired anything up, and then they go and they set up those instances. So the next time that this Cloud Connector syncs, what we're going to see is it's going to discover all of those instances, and it's automatically going to start taking action. So in this case, it's going to activate. It's activating these ones, and it's automatically assigned the policies. And you're going to see it's going to continue to update, and it's going to assign the proper policy based on the information that we've provided. So now what we've done is we've been able to take extra information from AWS, so the things that we've defined within our AWS environment, and we're taking automatic action within our security tool, within deep security. So you can imagine how powerful that is. If you say that I have an instance that's a web server, and it's sitting in a production environment, you may want specific rules applied. So in this case, you probably don't want people FTPing into it or SSHing into it, whereas that's perfectly legitimate activity within your development environment. So you can use the metadata tagging within AWS to take intelligent decisions within Deep Security Manager. And that's something that's extremely powerful when you fully can leverage that. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Steve Neville to wrap up our part and share additional views on the shared responsibility model. Steve?
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Mark, and thanks a lot for walking us through that demonstration. I just wanted to wrap things up and then sort of close off the conversation with, from a high level, this is a truism that security and compliance, they're simple issues that need to be addressed regardless of where you deploy your servers. So deploying them in the data center, deploying them in the cloud, you've got issues you need to face. And what you've heard today from both Tom and from Mark is that there's some things that you need to do maybe a little bit differently, and you also need to understand where your responsibilities lie versus where perhaps your cloud provider lies in terms of responsibility. And that's exactly what you need to take away from this webinar, is that it is truly a shared responsibility model that you need to work within what Amazon provides. They provide a layer of security themselves and then give some tools that you can use to secure your deployments, and then using organizations like Trend Micro to secure that application layer, that operating system layer, and do that in a way that is, one, both comprehensive, and two, fits within the way that you want to deal with your instances inside of Amazon. And as Mark gave demonstrations of and some of the things we've heard from our customers, you want to do it in a way that is friendly to the environment and is not going to cause you to have an unnecessary amount of burden. Like automating the actual application of policy is going to help you a lot, as an example. So Trend Micro is an organization that we pride ourselves on understanding a lot of these issues that you're facing, and we want to share with you some of the things that we've learned. So beyond this webinar, we've got some interesting reading that you can take a look at on your own time. We've got a blog series that people like Mark have contributed to and given some ideas around deploying from a best practice perspective in the AWS environment, including not just our technology, but just best practices in general. We have a white paper. We do have a cloud readiness assessment tool that we've got, and we've done a webinar with Amazon, another partner, Accuvant, and ourselves around compliance, specifically around PCI and some of the new guidelines that were brought out this year that you're welcome to listen to and gather some more information around how the shared responsibility model can help you deal with the AWS deployment environment and gain the benefits that you're looking for in there. With that, I'll pass it back over to Maya and we can round things out.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you all for demonstrating how to extend enterprise cloud security with Trend Micro on AWS. I'd like to open it to Q&A right now. If our attendees would like to ask their questions, this is the time. And in the meantime, Steve, if you'd like, you can share with us some most commonly asked questions that you encounter in your business. And that might get the thoughts flowing for our participants.
Sure, and actually maybe I'll get Mark to take that. He definitely talks at a technical level to a lot of our customers. Mark, what are people talking about that they need questions answered?
Sure. One of the common questions that we get is, aren't the tools that AWS provides enough for security? And that's a really common question. And the answer, is that no, they're not. But the tools that AWS provides are top notch, and they are transparent in how they apply their security, as Tom illustrated earlier. But they are very transparent as well in how security is to be applied within the shared responsibility model. So they provide world-class security up until the operating system level, and then it's the client's responsibility from there to do that. So as I mentioned in the earlier slide about shared responsibility, was that while they provide tools for our end of the shared responsibility model, like security groups, like network ACLs and routing tables and things like that, it's up to us as clients of AWS to understand how they work. And exactly what they cover from our area, so that we know what we can do within the tool set that AWS provides, and then what we have to apply from a third party to secure the operating system and then to secure our specific applications.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. One other question that we do get quite often is around the whole protection of data. We get this globally from different organizations, and it's really centered around the fact that when data is sitting in the cloud, how do I protect it? What can I do to protect it? And one of the things that we hear from AWS and what we recommend is the use of encryption. We do provide a product that can help with that is built along the exact same lines as what Mark talked about. And the reason I reference that is that you want to pick something from an encryption point of view that has the automated policy, that has the ability to do things like not only data volume protection, but also boot volume protection when you've got an instance running in the cloud. And the question that we get a lot around encryption is that going to help me from a data destruction? And the great news is that some encryption products can absolutely help you with that. As I mentioned, we get a lot of people interested in that area, and so the good news is that there are options available. We have one that we think is pretty great, but there are options available as well that can help with the encryption side of things.
Thank you, Steve. We do have a question from the audience I'd like to address. From the firewall policy, can you refer AWS security groups when defining rules? Mark, would you like to take that?
Sure. Yeah, and that's a great question from Jeremy. And basically what we can do is in the demo, you saw that we used an AWS tag to to make an automated decision within deep security. We can also use the security group to do the same thing. So in that case, what you can say is all of your EC2 instances that are running in the default security group, apply the deep security policy, highly restricted, or whatever you've made as far as within deep security, whatever the policy lines up. So you could do an exact one-for-one mapping of whatever you've made in AWS and line that up with deep security policies, or you can make decisions based on that. So a common one that we see from our clients, especially, this was in a conversation with a large financial provider a couple weeks ago, and what they were doing was saying anybody who fires up an instance that uses the default security group, lock it down. So they were applying a very restrictive security policy within deep security, because they had an internal process that said when you're setting up an instance in AWS, you need to create a custom security group or fall under one of these standard security groups that they had developed internally. So they knew that if somebody had fired up an instance using the default security group, that they weren't really following the best practice, so they wanted to ensure that they had everything covered, so they applied a more sophisticated policy within deep security. So to answer your question, Jeremy, yes, you can reference it, but based on the overall, based on what it is as far as the task, and then apply a matching or alternate policy within deep security.
Thank you, Mark. One more question from the audience, a general question about availability of the webinar. It will be available on YouTube and on AWS SlideShare within 2 weeks, and Trend Micro team will reach out to you with that information when the webinar is available. Any other questions from the audience, or questions that Steve and Mark perhaps you would like to address just from your experience?
Yeah, Maya, it's Mark here. There's one thing, sort of adding to what Steve was mentioning about encryption, is what I've seen from customers when they are most successful in an AWS environment, it's when they really embrace the shared responsibility model, and they've leveraged the tools that AWS provides to create a really secure network design within their VPC. And then what they've done on top of that is leveraged tools like Deep Security or our encryption product, Secure Cloud, in conjunction with each other to start to make a really holistic approach to the security. So they're using a very tight design within their VPC, then they're using Deep Security to apply additional controls, and then to validate things like I discussed with in response to Jeremy's question, as far as that people are using their procedures within AWS, but then taking it a step further and ensuring that things like Secure Cloud for encryption is running and active on the machine, using Deep Security to do that. So they're using multiple tools to check that the other tools are in fact working correctly, and it's really when you start to layer things on and get as much of it automated as possible, that's where they're being extremely successful, and in fact coming up with deployments that are just as, if not more secure than they can do within their data center. And that's all made possible because they understand how that model works, and they're leveraging all the automated capabilities from AWS and from the things that we provide within our platforms.
Thank you, Mark, for your explanation. We have one more question from the audience, and I will direct this to Steve. Any chance we could hear how the product is licensed and costs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a licensing perspective, we've really embraced the way that organizations like yourselves are using AWS and using the cloud. And what I mean by that is that we have traditional software pricing where we can sell our deep security product, which we typically sell on a per server basis. We also have the ability to sell our security capabilities on a per instance basis, so like applying it to what you would do for reserved instances in the exact same way. And then we also have the ability to sell it based on how you're consuming your actual instances on AWS. And what I mean by that is we are taking an approach where you only pay for what you use relative to the size of the instance that you're using, where you'll be charged actually for the server hours that you run. And I'll use an example. Say you use a large image up on Amazon, we would charge a percentage of that for the security that you use, and only for the amount of time that you use it. From a cost point of view, I think we'd be happy to follow up and talk further on actual costs, but it is very aggressive in the way we're doing it, much like the way that Amazon prices its products.
Thank you, Steve. And if we don't have any other questions, I would like to wrap up the webinar. A special thanks to our presenters, Steve and Mark from Trend Micro, and Tom with AWS. And our attendees, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. And before you log off, we invite you to take a very brief survey. It is very brief, and let us know how we did and how we can improve our webinar series. Simply click the link in your browser to activate the survey. And again, thank you for joining us. And this concludes today's Amazon Web Services Partner webcast.